Hi, this is George Alger with the True Green Energy Video Report. Once again, speaking with Craig Shields, the author of Renewable Energy, Facts and Fantasies. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, George.
And of course, Craig is also the editor of TwoGreenEnergy.com, and he is a funding liaison. And although we've spoken a number of times about various funding ideas that you like or that you're actively trying to get funding for out of many business plans that you review, for this segment, let's talk about things that you don't like, and particularly underfunded electric truck companies. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, as you know, I'm a big fan of electric transportation, and as it turns out, though there are not as many trucks on the roads as there are cars, obviously trucks produce more noxious elements in terms of exhaust, et cetera, than cars do. So it's a huge deal to replace, just as we're replacing passenger cars from internal combustion engines to electric motors and batteries and so forth. It's equally, if not more important, to do this with trucks. What I've run across, however, just from looking at this from the standpoint of what I do all day, in other words, analyze business plans and say, well, what can I comfortably represent to a team of investors who are trusting me to vet these deals? I've looked at 600 business plans over the last 18 months, and there are only a couple dozen that I feel are really eminently fundable and something that I'm proud and enthusiastic about representing. So one thing that I can see is something of a non-starter is companies that are essentially about R&D. They're engineers that have built something that looks kind of cool. But there is a huge valley of death, as they say in venture capital. In other words, there's a huge chasm between the funding that is required to develop something and to prove that it works. I took a test drive in a magnificent Class 3 truck the other day, and the CEO, the engineer who built it, was extremely proud of it, and I was thrilled with it too. But I can understand that there's a kind of chasm between that and creating a kind of critical mass in terms of getting that thing built. So in other words, if you want to build a couple of these things, they're going to be very expensive. Can you sell them enough to make this thing profitable in the short term? Can you convince investors that you're going to be here to make this thing successful? There are a lot of questions associated with that, and the answer in a lot of cases is no. In other words, they simply don't have the critical mass, and they wind up going belly up. And you can kind of see the signs for this thing even while you're out there taking the test drive with the guy. You go, well, where are you going to sell this thing? Tell me about the process of taking this design idea and commercializing this effectively. And you can see that there are a lot of halts, and it's an awkward moment.
Okay, and as a point of clarification, when you refer to underfunded electric truck companies, in fact, these are folks who would be looking for funding, and that's why they're contacting you. But really, it seems to be you're suggesting that there's got to be a base amount of funding that shows a certain amount of viability to even contemplate the kind of funding you could provide.
Right. Well, that's the reason that Bob Lutz, the co-chairman of GM, said a couple of years ago that nobody except one of the established auto OEMs is going to be able to do this transition to electric vehicles. I don't agree with him, by the way, but it turns out that for every time that he was wrong, proven wrong in the last couple of years, there have been several times he was proven right. And simply because this is an enormously capital-intensive business. So the people, these couple of business plans that I'm talking about are fantastic examples of that, where there just isn't the critical mass. I'll give you a good example. In that book that you showed, one of the chapters is Rick Sykes, the fleet manager for the city of Santa Monica. Santa Monica has 87% alternative fuel vehicles. It's a very progressive, very affluent city that can afford to do the right thing and does it aggressively. But I said, well, tell me about your relationship. You must have people banging down the doors here from these kind of startup EV companies, you're looking for trucks. Sounds like a perfect fit. Well, the problem is, he goes, I can't put somebody in business. I can't take taxpayers' money and say, okay, here's a purchase order to go build something that I may never see. I can't behave that way. So you see the problem. It really is a kind of chicken and the egg type of a thing. Either there's private capital or a public-private partnership, or there's some vehicle to get this thing the critical mass that it needs, or it's just going to sputter and stall. And I think, I think I've seen a couple of these things on their way to that unhappy conclusion.
All right. Well, to end on a positive note, is there any advice you might give for something you see that could have an opportunity to get funded along this line?
Well, it just has to be special. It has to be special. It has to be some type of solution on this thing with enough horsepower behind it that it's not going to wind up, going out of business in this kind of valley of death between the prototype stage and the commercialization stage. The other thing that I would say is, I know this sounds like a weird thing to say, but be honest. So in other words, if you walk into one of these businesses that has gone from 500 employees to 50 employees, and now the place looks like a ghost town, and they go, "Oh, we're right around the corner from blowing the roof off this thing." Well, it's probably not true. The problem is that they're running out of cash. So if a business like this does have a trajectory for success, it lies in honesty. Certainly, I don't, fooling people about your financial readiness to take this thing to the next step isn't going to help anybody.
All right. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, happy to be here.
All right, George Alger signing off from the 2 Green Energy Video Report. Until we see you again.